because that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5.
Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 o'clock on Friday the 5th of May. This is To The Point with me, Tom Harwood, at the GB News studio, and Bev Turner is in Buckingham Palace. Well, what a night it's been, and what a day it continues to be. Will Hollis is in Stoke-on-Trent, where Labour have regained control of the council in a city with 3 Tory MPs.
For the first time since 2015, Labour has control over the City Council here in Stoke, but that's on a local level. I've been speaking to the people here in Stoke's high streets to find out if their votes will be going towards Labour in a future general election.
And let's move from Stoke to Hull, where Anna Riley has the very latest.
It's been an eventful night for the Lib Dems here in Hull. Not only have they held control over the council, but they've also gained more seats. We'll have more very soon.
And it's the final countdown to the coronation. Thousands of people have already descended on the Mall, and all morning at Buckingham Palace, Bev will be live as those rehearsals and final preparations get underway. And I'm live here in the GB News studio with all the latest on the local election results and what they mean for you. So remember to get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But before all of that, here's your latest news with Rihanna.
Tom, thank you. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 10, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Conservatives have suffered heavy losses in local elections in England, with Labour and the Liberal Democrats both making gains. The Tories have lost control of 10 councils so far, including Windsor and Maidenhead, which has gone to the Liberal Democrats. Labour's gained 3 councils, including Plymouth, Hartlepool and Worcester. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has acknowledged some disappointing results, but denies there's been a big swing to Labour.
We're making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, Bassetlaw, Sandwell, but the message I am hearing from people tonight is that they want us to focus on their priorities and they want us to deliver for them. And that's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. That's what people care about, that's what they want us to deliver, and that's what I and the government are going to work very hard to do.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, meanwhile, believes he's now on course to becoming the next Prime Minister.
We've just taken Medway for the first time since 1998. That is a very, very good night for the Labour Party. We didn't just get it over the line, we absolutely smashed it. And it's the same story elsewhere. Same story in Plymouth, in Stoke, up in Middlesbrough, and these are the key battlegrounds as we go into the next election. And make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election.
Well, the Prime Minister's back in Downing Street hosting world leaders who've arrived for the King's coronation. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was first to arrive. Rishi Sunak's also hosting New Zealand's Prime Minister Chris Hipkins, both vocal Republicans, but they've both said they will swear allegiance to the King tomorrow. And with just a day to go until the coronation, police say disruptive protests in Windsor will be treated with a lower tolerance level over the weekend. Around 1,000 officers from Thames Valley Police will be on patrol, with the number peaking for the coronation concert in Windsor on Sunday. The Met Police says 29,000 officers will be deployed for the event itself as security is tightened. Rail travellers are facing disruption again after RMT members backed further strikes over the next 6 months. Workers at 14 train operating companies have already announced plans to walk off the job next weekend. The strike will disrupt travel to the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool. The result from the latest ballot saw a 70% turnout, with over 90% of union members voting in favour of further industrial action. Transport Minister Mark Harper says he's disappointed by the decision. A 33-year-old man has been charged with the murder of a woman stabbed to death in Brixton in South London earlier this week. Police believe 31-year-old Johanita Kosiwa-Dogby was attacked from behind as she walked home on Monday afternoon. Mohammed Nur has been charged with murder and grievous bodily harm after 2 women and a man were slashed in separate incidents last Saturday. Schools say they're increasingly struggling to recruit teachers, with tens of thousands of vacancies. The Recruitment and Employment Confederation says issues over pay aren't being addressed. Teachers are embroiled in an ongoing dispute, with more strikes threatened later this year. Elsewhere, police in Serbia have arrested a suspect after 8 people were shot dead in a village near Belgrade. 13 others were wounded in the shooting. Police say a 21-year-old has now been detained. It's the second mass shooting around the capital in as many days. A 13-year-old boy was shot dead 9 children at a school on Wednesday before turning himself in. Back here, first-time buyers are paying on average £200 more a month for their mortgage compared with this time last year. Rightmove says new homeowners who put down a 15% deposit are now paying more than £1,000 a month. The property website also says the average asking price for a first-time buyer property is now almost £225,000. More than 400,000 people will be handed a medal for their efforts with the King's coronation. Police officers, choristers, military personnel and ambulance workers are among those who will receive the medals. Made of nickel silver, they'll feature a portrait of King Charles and the Queen Consort, and on the other side, a laurel wreath and the date of the coronation. Meanwhile, people travelling on the railways this weekend will be told to mind the gap by a very special voice indeed, by none other than the King and Queen Consort themselves. They've recorded an announcement to be played at every railway and underground station across the UK all weekend and Bank Holiday Monday.
My wife and I wish you and your families a wonderful coronation weekend.
Wherever you are travelling, we hope you have a safe and pleasant journey.
And remember, please mind the gap.
Very special indeed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Bev.
Well, a very good morning to you on a very interesting results day. Of course, people took to the polls yesterday from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. in much of England, although crucially not in Scotland and not in Wales and not in Northern Ireland, nor in London. So a patchy picture across the country, but results are continuing to fly in from these local elections throughout the morning. The Conservatives are already looking bleak with their expectations. Over 200 councillors already having lost their seats, around 20 to 25% of the way into counting. But the spoils are currently divided between the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. But with only 64 councils counting votes overnight, we still won't know the full extent of the picture until a little later on today. But let's see what we can find out from what we know so far. Let's get the reaction of GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and GB News presenter Phil Davies, the Conservative MP for Shipley, who both join me in the studio. And Nigel, let's start with you. This has clearly been a good night for the Labour Party. The question is, has it been good enough?
Well, that's what we have to find out. You're absolutely right. We won't really know till this afternoon when a whole load of other seats will come through. We're then talking about whether or not it is a real bloodbath for the Tories or whether Labour haven't done as well as they were hoping. I mean, there have been some disappointments for Labour. They didn't get Bolton, which was one of their targets. But obviously, they also did get, well, more importantly, Medway. That's got 3 Tory MPs. It's been blue for the last 20 years. They got Stoke, which is another place where there are 3 Conservative MPs. And they're predicting things like that if these results are then extrapolated nationally as a vote share, they could capture places like Aldershot, which has been, in a general election, which has been Tory for 100 years. So from those points of view, it's actually looking quite good for them. But then the Lib Dems have done quite well as well. I mean, the fact they've captured Windsor and Maidenhead, that is a very good result.
Very symbolic on a coronation weekend.
Absolutely.
It was interesting to look at the ward that contains Eton College. It has gone from Tory to Lib Dem. I don't know quite what that signifies.
No, well, I don't know. Well, I wonder if the Etonians were voting.
Well, maybe some of them. I think it does go up to 18, so perhaps some of them were old enough. Phil Davies, the Labour Party is doing well in particularly some Brexit heartlands of this country. Lots of conversation around Stoke-on-Trent, one of the sort of Brexit capitals of England, going to Labour in a big way this time round.
Yeah, it's been interesting, the results. I mean, it's been a bad night for the Conservatives, I think more so than a good night for Labour or a good night for anyone else. It's just been a bad night for the Conservatives, and when it's a bad night for the Conservatives, by definition, it's going to be a good night for the other parties. I think in places like Stoke, I mean, what you saw was where in these elections 4 years ago, parties like UKIP got quite a big vote. They've probably not stood in lots of these places, or their votes collapsed, and it seems that lots of those sort of working-class Brexit voters in places like Stoke have gone back to vote in Labour, which should give them some encouragement. But overall, I think the story of the night is that this has been a bad night for the Conservatives, and really, I'm not sure what anyone else would have expected after the turbulent year that the government and the Conservative Party have had. You know, we're on our 3rd Prime Minister since last year's local elections. We were, I think, 30-odd points down in the opinion polls in October. When Rishi Sunak took over, it was always going to be an element of damage limitation. And so to that extent, he probably has limited the damage. I think in October last year, the Conservative Party would probably have bitten your hand off for these results that we're seeing this morning.
So we're potentially seeing the opinion polls just play out in reality across the country. Let's turn now to Rochester, to Medway, where indeed Keir Starmer has been celebrating these results. Of course, Medway Council has flipped to Labour, over 10 seats gained on that council by the Labour Party. Here's how the new leader of the Medway Council greeted everyone alongside Sir Keir Starmer. Well, are the grown-ups back in charge? Nigel, this is a guy called Vince Maple. He's now the new leader of Medway Council. Was this a reasonable way to behave?
I know Vince Maple, and I can imagine him doing just that. He was obviously so delighted about the victory that, of course, he should be allowed to actually celebrate it in that kind of way.
Now, having a lot of fun. Phil, when you've won an election, have you ever run with your head down and waggling your arms?
I can't quite say it's anything that I fancy doing. I mean, to be perfectly honest, though, I think on a more serious point, some of the behaviour that you see from some candidates and some parties at election counts would probably see people put off voting for those parties and those candidates forevermore, to be honest. You do see some disgraceful scenes at election counts where you have a combination of bad losers and bad winners, and that doesn't do anybody any justice. But that's not really my kind of style, dancing around like that.
No, although I do remember some of the particularly bad winners and losers from 2019. It's when they get really shouty that I find it's more egregious than perhaps a waggle of an arm or two. But let's turn now to get some views around the country. Let's go across to Stoke-on-Trent, which we were discussing a little bit earlier. Our reporter Will Hollis is live in Stoke for us, and Al O'Reilly is in Hull as well. Let's turn to you, Will, first. How significant is this victory for the Labour Party?
Yes, well, you heard it when Keir Starmer said it. He said these are the key battlegrounds for Labour. He said Stoke, he said Plymouth as well. And here on Stoke's High Street, this is Hanley. It's part of the local constituency for Stoke Central. That's one of the constituencies that went towards the Conservatives in a red wall area where it tends to be Labour controlled. So for Labour to win a council, it's a really good indicator for people like Keir Starmer and his Labour Party of where we might be going towards in a next general election. Specifically at Stoke City Council, it was 29 seats that Labour managed to win. It's a 44-seat council, so it's way over the 23-seat majority that they needed. The Conservative Party went in with 22 seats, as did the Independents with about 10 or 11 seats. The Conservatives did fairly badly, not too badly though. They got 14 seats. Of course, they're not in control of the council anymore. They did have a minority control backed up by those independents. Those independents have been pretty much decimated, with only one independent being re-elected to the council. So it shows that Labour Party is back in control here, and they're going to be doing what they want to do in Stoke, in an area that they tend to do quite well in. But as I said, in an area that's big on the Leave vote, 69% or so voting for Brexit, with a big working class community, this is exactly the sort of place where the Labour Party wants to be drawing its attention as they go through into the next year or 2 years, with hopefully a general election win, if they can do that, Tom.
Really, really interesting to see that sort of demographic shift. Let's turn to Anna Riley now in Hull, because here's somewhere where the Labour Party perhaps hasn't done as well. When their opponents aren't the Conservatives, the Labour Party was hoping to pick up Hull, and they haven't.
That's right, Tom. Yes, it may be wet and miserable here, but that's certainly not raining on the parade for the Lib Dems. They're celebrating victory here in keeping the majority control over the council and also gaining an additional 3 seats. They took 2 from Labour and another one.
Anna, I'm just going to pause you there because Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, is speaking now. Let's turn to Ed Davey in Windsor.
The country, more gains, I think, for the Liberal Democrats to come. And that's thanks to the hard work of so many Liberal Democrat campaigners across the country. They've sent a message. The Liberal Democrats are the big winners in this year's local elections. Yay! Just like we were last year. Yay! And just like we were in 2019 when these seats were last fought. And, you know, when people have a chance to vote, when they can go into those polling stations, they're choosing to vote for a Liberal Democrat candidate, a Liberal Democrat campaigner. They know that we work hard for them, that we listen to their concerns, and they will never take them for granted. The people have sent a huge message, a message so loud that even someone as out of touch as Rishi Sunak can't ignore. We're fed up of waiting so long for the basics. Waiting for hours for an ambulance, days for a GP appointment, months and even years for a hospital appointment. Waiting in vain for the police to turn up when there's been a break-in. Waiting for months for a pothole to be mended and repaired. Waiting for real action to help people who are struggling with their soaring energy bills and food prices. And waiting, still waiting, for those hospitals that have been promised for years now. Waiting, waiting, waiting for an end to the sewage that these companies keep pouring into our rivers, onto our beaches. And we're waiting for the government to listen to people, and stop taking them for granted. People are waiting for a fair deal. These Conservative MPs are out of touch, out of ideas, and out of excuses. People are fed up of waiting for a chance to kick them out. We're all fed up of waiting for a general election. And you know, I think there's a chance now that we can have that general election within the next year. And I think the message is clear. The time's up for Rishi Sunak and his appalling Conservative government. The Liberal Democrats have shown that we are the ones working hard in communities across our country. We're the ones to beat so many Conservatives across the blue wall and beyond. And I'm determined that the Liberal Democrats keep working, don't take people for granted, show our amazing policies. And so my message to my party is a great night for us, but let's go back and work even harder so we can beat the Conservatives at the next general election. Thank you very much. Thank you. Wow. I bet you're tired. Yeah. But what a result here. Absolutely fabulous. You know, when I came, you told me you might win 10. Was it 13 you won? 13. Wow, what a result. Well done, Simon. Well done.
The leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Are you the new leader of the council?
I find myself celebrating the victory there in Eton, in Windsor. Time's up for Rishi Sunak, says his big clock. This isn't the first stunt that the Liberal Democrats do at these election times. They're famous for it. But let's get some reaction now. I'm delighted to be joined by James Murray, the Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury. And James, Ed Davey there was saying that the Liberal Democrats are the big winners of these elections. I suppose you disagree.
Well, you'd expect him to say that. I mean, what I would say, these are a very strong set of results for the Labour Party, and they show that we're on course for a majority Labour government. You know, because we've been campaigning in recent weeks and months about our plan to tackle the cost of living crisis. And what we've seen is gains right across the country, you know, in Middlesbrough, Stoke-on-Trent, Medway, Plymouth, you know, all different parts of the country, showing that we're making that progress in the places we need to win the next general election.
Are you concerned that in the areas where the Labour Party is facing other parties, for example in Hull, there hasn't been progress made for Labour? In fact, it's only where Labour's standing against the Tories where there's been progress. Does that perhaps suggest that it isn't Labour winning the votes and it's more just the Tories that are losing them?
Well, I think when you've had a government that's been in power for 13 years, if you're approaching a general election, people think of it through two different angles. One, the current government losing, and two, the opposition winning. And I think what we're seeing now is that the Conservatives, after 13 years in power, people are just fed up. People want to change. People want to move on from the Conservatives. But people are also looking at Labour and saying, yeah, they've actually got a plan for to tackle the cost of living crisis. They've actually got ideas about the long-term challenges we face. They've actually got some policies there which are more than just sort of sticking plasters to get us through the next few weeks or months. And they're looking to us as an alternative. And I think that's why, as I say, right across the country, we're seeing that progress we need.
We have seen some policy come from Keir Starmer in recent weeks, which is a big change from the last couple of years. But when are we going to see the detail? We hear in the abstract that, for example, planning reform is something the Labour Party wants to pursue, something that no doubt could bring big economic growth to this country. But how are you going to deliver it? The Conservative Party tried to do it 3 times in the last 10 years and were defeated. Why is the Labour Party going to do it differently?
Well, what you can see in the Conservatives now is that they are absolutely governed by division within their own party. You know, there's so much effort goes into just keeping their political party in Parliament together. You know, Rishi Sunak can't do much because he's so hamstrung by his backbenchers. And I think that really shows that there's a government that they're out of energy, out of ideas, you know, can't do the bold things we need to tackle the challenges we face in the future. You know, we know that what we really need are long-term plans to the big challenges that we face, right? So rather than a series of sticking plasters just to get us through the next few weeks or the next few months, we actually need a solution to the big challenges we face. And if you look underneath so many of the problems we face, the really core one underneath all of that is the economy. And the truth is, over the last 13 years, we've had low economic growth, which has led to people's wages stagnating and to lower tax revenue to fund our public services. And that's why our number one mission that we set out what we would do in government is to get the economy growing. The highest sustained growth in the G7 is our mission.
How can voters trust that what you're saying now will be the same that you're saying after an election? Your leader has this week U-turned on his pledge to abolish tuition fees. He's U-turned on his pledge to nationalise energy companies. He's U-turned on his pledge to keep free movement with the European Union. All of the pledges that he stood on to become leader of your party seem to have been ditched. And we're seeing a new Keir Starmer now. How do we know that this is the real deal?
Well, I think what Keir set out in his pledges when he stood to be leader of the Labour Party, were his values. It was about what drives him in politics, what his mission is, being an MP, wanting to be leader, wanting to be Prime Minister, and none of that has changed. He's still absolutely committed. No, he's still absolutely committed to building a fair economy, tackling climate change, restoring public services, and so on. What has changed is the world. The world around us has changed. And actually, what we need to do as an opposition is make sure that the manifesto pledges we go into the next election with are right for the times and reflect the economic reality that we're in. The economy has changed. The world has changed so much in the last few years, not least because of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and all the damage that they did to the economy last autumn. But we would need to make sure that any pledges we make are fully costed, fully funded, long-term solutions that we can stick by, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Now, just finally, this was the first election in England to have voter ID mandated across the country. Would Labour keep that reform?
Well, look, we thought the introduction of photo ID for voting at elections is unnecessary because it's essentially a solution in search of a problem, because the problem just doesn't exist at the scale that would necessitate a solution of this type. I think in 2019 there was one conviction for voter impersonation, so it's not a widespread problem that needs a solution. So you would reverse it? Well, we opposed it when it was going through Parliament. We don't think it's necessary. We think it's a waste of money as well. And I think, frankly, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, to spend all of this money on a system which is not needed is something that will have most voters scratching their heads over.
Just try one more time. Would you repeal it in government?
Well, we'll set out all of our plans ahead of the next election, but we don't think it's necessary now. We still urge the government to think again about it whilst they're still in power.
Well, James Murray, thank you so much for joining us and talking through those results of this pretty seismic local election. Of course, the last big electoral test before the next general election expected next year. You're watching GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're watching GB News, and it's not just election coverage we have, of course, because tomorrow a rather big event is taking place for the whole United Kingdom. Let's cross live now to Bev Turner, who is at Buckingham Palace for us.
Welcoming us here to Buckingham Palace this morning. It is a little chilly, I cannot lie, but the sun is trying very hard to get through. Fortunately, I have a fantastic pundit with me this morning. Rafe Haydel-Mancu is here with me. He's still working very hard this week, Rafe. It feels a little sort of quieter here this morning. It's almost like, I don't want to say the calm before the storm, because it's certainly not going to be a storm tomorrow. But if there is actually literally rather than metaphorically bad weather, this flyby could be under threat.
That's right. So the grand crescendo, the cherry on the cake of all major royal events is, of course, the famous balcony fly past. The royal family there, the new king there, and we were supposed to have 60 to 70 planes flying over. So it will be a huge shame if it doesn't happen. The first week of May, as I said several months ago, is a risky time to have an event because April showers do tend to leak into May. Most coronations tend to take place in June or in the last week of May. But we have to be optimistic. The sun did break through earlier. We know how easy British weather is for changing, although currently there's a 70% chance of showers. There are two major issues. One is the rain. If there's a lot of rain, then the historic planes of the the Battle of Britain Memorial flight won't be able to participate. The Spitfires, one of the only 2 Lancasters in the world that can still fly, they would have to be grounded.
But where do they take off from to come over?
Well, they all come off. Well, because all of these planes fly at different speeds, obviously World War II planes far slower, they're all timed to take off from different places and coincide. It's a hugely skilled operation.
Amazing.
And so much time and energy has gone into this by all 3 branches of the armed forces. It will be a huge shame for them. The other problem affecting the new planes is, of course, the cloud cover. So a lot of these planes fly at 40,000 feet or so. They have to come down to 1,000 feet to fly over London. But if the cloud level is too low, you simply won't be able to see them. And one of the great shames is, along with things like the Apaches and the Chinooks, the great helicopters and planes, they really wanted to show off the new Royal jet, the fastest jet the Royals have had in history. It's called the Envoy 4, and it was going to take pride of place just before the Red Arrows. And that was going to really be a great sort of proud to be British moment. And then after that, of course, the famous Red Arrows flying down the Mall with their plumes of red, white and blue smoke. So let's keep our fingers crossed. As we've been speaking, the sun's breaking out a little bit.
It is a little bit. I mean, that would be such a shame. It would be incredibly quintessentially British, obviously, if it does get cancelled because of the bad weather. Do we know why they chose to hold the coronation this weekend as opposed to in June? So 70 years ago, it was about the second week of June, I think.
It was the 2nd of June, yeah.
2nd of June.
I mean, what happened in 1953 is they tried to find the driest day of the summer. And they just decided that June the 2nd was the date on which it was least likely to rain. And what happened? It was the wettest day of the year, probably of the decade, that the clouds opened. And then so ever since then, I think, having rain, even torrential downpours, has become a royal tradition in its own right. In 2012, we had the great Diamond Jubilee pageant down the Thames, and we all were like drowned rats, those of us who took part, because it was such, and you had 3 or 4 people left on the sides of the river with damp, limp Union flags. It was quite a sorry state, but the choir at the end, as Tower Bridge opened in the rain, they were singing Rule Britannia on this windswept boat, and I thought that's what makes you proud to be British.
Looking at some of the weather forecast for tomorrow, it looks like it's likely to be, this is my weather girl moment, likely to be dry in the morning and dry in the afternoon, but those 2 hours when they're in Westminster Abbey 11 till 1 is apparently when we've got the highest chance of rain, which would be great for everyone at home because you're going to be watching it on GB News. Where else would you be? It will be very disappointing for the people who have lined the streets, though, won't it, if it starts, the heavens open in the morning.
And of course the perennial problem of people's umbrellas getting in the way and blocking, and so what do? Do you have an umbrella, or do you get wet for the sake of other people? Now, were this happening in China or Russia, they would have planes flying up to disperse the cloud with chemicals, but of course we know our ecologically minded king wouldn't be in favour of anything like that, and quite rightly too.
Talking of China, that's one of the controversial issues this morning, isn't it, about the Chinese guests who will be in attendance. I don't think it's going to overshadow the event, though, do you?
No, I mean this is international diplomacy of the petty kind. Little snubs regarding Britain's attitude towards China in recent years, but let's not let any of that overshadow the event. Look, we have 203 nations represented at the Abbey. 100 of those are heads of state. For the first time ever, crowned heads of the world are also coming. Normally monarchs don't come. So there are lots of reasons to be interested and celebrate this without getting sidetracked by these sorts of issues.
And saying the Lord's Prayer in one's own tongue and recitals from people from other religions. It's going to be the most diverse coronation that we've ever seen.
It will be the most diverse coronation. The king has said, you know, not only does he want to be defender of the faith, but also defender of faith. And I think he can do both. One is an official role, and one is simply a social role, a spiritual role that he wants to fulfill. Of course, this does remain at its heart, most importantly, a Christian service, an Anglican service. That's very important constitutionally for the role of the king. We are, of course, with the only coronation in Europe that still has that religious element. We're the only ones to place the crown on. We're the only ones to have the anointing. The coronation is a Christian sacrament akin to marriage or akin to becoming a priest. Indeed, a coronation ring is placed on the finger of the sovereign during the coronation, so that's been maintained. There was some discussion about whether there might be Buddhist chant, for example, but no, there'll be Greek Orthodox chant, reflecting, of course, the king's paternal grandmother, Princess Alice, who was a nun in the Greek Orthodox Church. So that's a nice incorporation, but still within the Christian faith.
I hate to interrupt you, Rafe. The whistles are blowing, the motorcycles are going past. That means there will be some royals in these Range Rovers just coming across behind us. Get your binoculars out, Rafe Haydel Mankin.
Here we go.
If you can't spot who it is, then none of us have got any chance. We're just going to see who it is coming around the corner here.
I'm not.
Oh, it's Prince William.
Prince William.
It's the Prince of Wales. We couldn't quite see the Princess of Wales. Prince William there in his full military uniform.
So there are a huge number of Range Rovers around St James's Palace. The police are out in their ceremonial uniform there, and there's going to obviously be a reception or an event taking place there.
Yeah. Oh well. I'm sure he's listening to GB News on DAB radio from his Range Rover. Stay with us all morning, won't you, until midday. Anything can happen. Of course, yesterday's local election results continue to pour in, and Tom Harwood will have the latest on that for you as well. But first of all, here is your news with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Bev. It's 10:36. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Conservatives have suffered heavy losses in local elections in England, with Labour and the Liberal Democrats both making gains. The Tories have lost control of 10 councils so far, including Windsor and Maidenhead, which has gone to the Lib Dems. Labour's gained 3, including Plymouth, Hartlepool and Worcester. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's acknowledged some disappointing results, but denies there's been a big swing to Labour.
We're making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, Bassetlaw, Sandwell, but the message I am hearing from people tonight is that they want us to focus on their priorities and they want us to deliver for them. And that's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. That's what people care about, that's what they want us to deliver, and that's what I and the government are going to work very hard to do.
Meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer believes he's now on course to becoming the next Prime Minister.
We've just taken Medway for the first time since 1998. That is a very, very good night for the Labour Party. We didn't just get it over the line, we absolutely smashed it. And it's the same story elsewhere. Same story in Plymouth, in Stoke, up in Middlesbrough, and these are the key battlegrounds as we go into the next election. And make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election.
The King and Queen Consort are at Westminster Abbey for the final rehearsal ahead of tomorrow's coronation. King Charles waved to the crowds who've gathered for the historic event as his convoy arrived, with little over 24 hours now to go until the ceremony. Meanwhile, people travelling on the railways this weekend will be told to mind the gap by a very special voice indeed, by none other than the King himself. Along with the Queen Consort, King Charles recorded an announcement to be played at every railway and underground station across the UK all weekend and Bank Holiday Monday.
My wife and I wish you and your families a wonderful coronation weekend.
Wherever you are travelling, we hope you have a safe and pleasant journey.
And remember, please mind the gap.
TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2603 and €1.1430. The price of gold is £1,618.82 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,742 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back to a very special series here on GB News. It's not only the coronation this week, but of course the local elections took place across much of England last night and indeed throughout the day yesterday. Counting across around a quarter of those votes has taken place already, and we're starting to see a bit of a picture build up. But what is that picture? I'm delighted to be joined here by an esteemed panel of guests, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, and GB News presenter Phil Davies, the Conservative MP for Shipley, and James Murray, the Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, is still with us too. Let's start with you, Phil. It's not been a good night for the Tories.
No, it's not. No, it's been a bad night for the Conservative Party. But, I mean, what did anyone expect after the year that we've had? I mean, it was always going to be a terrible night for the Conservatives. And, you know, I think that the plus point for the Conservatives is that I think when Liz Truss left office, I think we were something north of 30 points down in the opinion polls. Rishi Sunak has steadied the ship. I think he's probably halved that deficit. In most of the polls I've seen, when people ask who would you prefer as Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, it's pretty much neck and neck. If in some polls I see Rishi Sunak ahead, he's certainly outperforming the Conservative brand. So he's certainly not the problem. He's our biggest plus point at the moment. So I think in terms of the general election, I think Rishi Sunak has steadied the ship, and if he does deliver on his 5 priorities, then that will put a different slant on things. But yeah, clearly it's been a very bad night for the Conservative Party. But I don't think anyone expected anything else, to be honest.
An hour or so ago, after Rishi Sunak walked into Conservative campaign headquarters with 4 bags of bacon rolls, he came out and spoke to the media and he said it actually hasn't been that bad a night at all for the Conservatives. He pointed to Peterborough, to Bassetlaw, to Sandwell, areas where the Conservatives have actually gained some councillors. Is he right or is he out of touch?
Well, look, I mean, political parties always point to the results that they want to point to and the ones that went in their direction and try and ignore the ones that were inconvenient. All political parties do that. I mean, I don't know why they do it, because nobody's fooled, are they, really? Everybody can see that it's been a bad night for the Conservative Party, and as a consequence of that, it's been a good night for Labour and a good night for the Lib Dems. But I think it's not real. From my sense of knocking on people's doors, it isn't really people wanting to go out and vote Labour or wanting to go out and vote Lib Dem. It was people wanting to give the Conservative Party a bit of a kick in because of their unhappiness over what's happened over the last year, and we've got to win those
James
people
Murray,
back.
do you agree with that assessment?
Well, no, look, let's start with some of the examples that Rishi Sunak gave of where he thinks he's done well. I mean, my understanding is in Bassetlaw, the Conservatives gained 3 seats off independents in a Conservative area, and that's it. That's what they're pointing at as a big success, and it's still the best result ever for Labour in Bassetlaw. So, you know, even the examples he points to, my understanding is that, you know, it's not really much to write home about. And actually, it reminds me of Rishi Sunak sometimes at Prime Minister's questions, you know, when Keir Starmer asks him about, you know, the NHS or the state of public services or the economy or whatever it is, and Rishi Sunak's response is quite often, oh, everything's fine, you know, what are people complaining about? That kind of response is what he gives. It has echoes of that, and when he's talking about the election results, the truth is they are disastrous for Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party. You know, you might even have expected Rishi Sunak now to be in some kind of honeymoon period after he took over. You know, compare it to 2019, you know, when the Conservatives were at rock bottom. Theresa May had to step down, you know, a few weeks after the 2019 elections. you would think that would be rock bottom. To go back, not just to go back, but to do so badly from that rock bottom position, just shows quite what a dire position they're in.
Hang on, James Murray, is this a honeymoon period for a new Prime Minister, or is this 13 long years of Tory government? You can't have it both ways.
Well, you just answered the question there. It's the latter, isn't it? This is proving that Rishi Sunak, is just the latest in a, increasingly long line of Conservative Prime Ministers who have been part of this 13-year project of Conservative government, which people have given up on and said is out of time.
I think the thing is, though, you've got to remember this is all a consequence of the lockdown. I mean, this is we're seeing the consequences of the lockdown. That's why the taxes are so high because of the lockdown. That's why the government's debt's so high. That's why inflation is so high. All of the things, and the Labour Party would have locked us down for longer and harder. So to be trying to claim credit for something that they would have made a situation they would have made worse is hardly inspiring. And of course,
James Murray, you want to come back on that?
Well, just on something else he might want to come back on. He says that Labour are the party to help people with the cost of living crisis. These are the people introducing ULEZ for motorists in London, clean air zones all around the country, which is piling on extra costs for people who happen to have the misfortune of having to use their car simply to go to work. So I'm not entirely sure that's a great message for people to say, we're going to help you with the cost of living, and then kick you in the teeth with a clean air zone and a ULEZ charge.
Look, the mess we're in is the result of 13 years of the Conservative government. I know that, again, in Parliament, when the Conservatives are talking, they always say, look, this is down to COVID, this is down to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this is down to events outside of our control. And yes, global factors have an influence on what happens in the UK, but we have been uniquely badly hit by economic forces. We are in a worse position than many other similar economies. And the truth is, this is the result of 13 years. This didn't all begin just a couple of years ago. This is 13 years of low growth, which is now culminating in the position that we're in today.
Well, let's turn to Nigel Nelson now. You've been listening to that sort of back and forth. I wonder, is there a question here over how much this has been 13 years of Tory government? Of course, 5 of it was with the Lib Dems. A big chunk of it was with no majority at all. It's only been a couple of years where they've actually had a decent-sized majority.
Well, yes. I mean, I do think the 13 years is a good point because government's actually run out of steam. And we've got to a point here where the Conservative government certainly has run out of steam. But it happens to all governments. I think if you go on beyond 10 years, it starts to become problematic. Certainly, David Cameron thought after 10 years, a Prime Minister goes a bit round the twist after that point. The other thing here is, I think it was really interesting, you talked about the Rishi Sunak honeymoon period, or rather the lack of it. What you would expect with a new Prime Minister is a honeymoon period, and we should be in it at the moment during these elections. What it tends to look like is a new Prime Minister looks like a new government. It's always meant to look fresh. John Major did that after he took over from Margaret Thatcher.
Boris Johnson did that.
Boris Johnson also did that. It looked like a new, fresh kind of government. This one doesn't. And that's the real problem for Rishi Sunak with results like this, that it looks as if, although he may well have steadied the ship as you're saying, what he hasn't done is show the inspiration that people need to think he is the Prime Minister for after the next general election.
Well, let's turn now to Mark White, GB News Home and Security Editor, who's outside Westminster Abbey. And Mark, what do you have for us?
Good morning, Tom. Yes, some breaking news really within the last half an hour. The King and Queen Consort have now been joined by the Prince and Princess of Wales here at Westminster Abbey for a final day of rehearsals ahead of this historic ceremony here at Westminster Abbey tomorrow. I mean, you can't even begin to imagine the pressure that they're all facing, of course, knowing that the eyes of the world will be on them for this almost 2-hour-long ceremony that's taking place behind me. The area here is already full of tourists, as it often is as we get into the warmer summer months, but many more, of course, here now. And then tomorrow it's going to be absolutely packed, thronged in the streets behind me, and of course all the way down the Mall to Buckingham Palace, all of the way around Trafalgar Square and down Whitehall, as people cram in to get their best look of the procession as it makes its way first from Buckingham Palace at about 10:20 in the morning, heading and arriving, we're told, at the Abbey around about 11 o'clock for that service. And when it heads back, processing back from the Abbey taking that same route. It's about 1.4 miles, or just under 1.5 miles long, considerably shorter than the ceremony procession route in 1953, which was some 4 miles long. But if you can't get, Tom, to see it along that long procession route, because the crowds will be immense, there will be big live screens at Green Park, at St James's Park and at Hyde Park, so there'll be lots of atmosphere there. And of course the added bonus is you can watch the ceremony on these huge big screens that'll be set up.
Well, Mark, thank you for that very latest news. We were watching that convoy going, wondering where they were headed to. It was, after all, to Westminster Abbey. Well, let's return to the elections now. The former Conservative MP, now Tory peer and former Culture Minister Ed Vaizey joins us. And Ed, I'm interested in your take on this. Rishi Sunak hasn't really been able to present this as sort of a new administration in the way that Boris Johnson did in 2019. Is that a fundamental problem for him?
No, I don't think it is. I'm a Rishi Sunak fan. I think he's brought back kind of sensible, moderate government that I think the public supports. But I do live in the Westminster Village, and the local elections are a wake-up call to those of us who do kind of sit in the Westminster Village and think everything is getting better. And Rishi Sunak is a very good Prime Minister, but he's not a miracle worker. And the Tories went into these elections having had 2 years of pretty chaotic government. We've been in power for 13 years, effectively. And we can't rely on Jeremy Corbyn anymore to kind of hemorrhage Labour votes. So there's a lot of things stacked against us. I think the consensus from the local election results is it's likely to be a hung parliament, which I've thought for a while. And I do think there's everything to play for Rishi Sunak. Slow and steady might sound a very boring approach to how to win an election, but I think the more that Rishi Sunak keeps taking sensible decisions, avoids absurd dramas, the more the public will simply say, well, maybe it's worth sticking with this guy rather than taking a risk with Keir Starmer. That's got to be his strategy, I think.
People talk a lot about Rishi Sunak having stabilised things, but in the end, hasn't he just stabilised things in terms of a very, very deep polling deficit against the Labour Party, around 15 points behind in the polls? That's not a position to want to be stable in.
Well, I think we've seen what unstable is, and that was Liz Truss. And that took us huge, gave Labour a massive lead in the polls. So Rishi Sunak is gradually hauling it back, whether you call it a kind of hare and tortoise strategy. So I don't think he has stabilised it at 15 points. I think the polls will continue to shift. And we all know as well, you know, we've all been here before with local elections, and Ed Miliband did very well in local elections, and then the Tories got their first majority for 25 years. So if he can continue to haul back the Labour lead and show that he's a competent and, I think, highly energetic Prime Minister, I think he can. I don't think he is going to stabilise at 15 points behind. I think he's going to gradually close the gap.
Now, I'm a kind of free market guy, and I was listening to Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, and I suddenly started finding myself thinking, hang on, is the Labour Party now the party that wants to do the radical supply-side reforms that'll actually get growth back in the country? We had a YIMBY-NIMBY battle across the dispatch boxes. Keir Starmer saying reform planning, let the market build more housing, and Rishi Sunak saying, no, let's get the state to stop houses being built. I mean, have we entered a topsy-turvy world through the looking glass here?
No, we've always, as Tories, been in two minds about housing. It's a very unfortunate position for us to be in. But a lot of Tory MPs represent rural constituencies. I represented a constituency that was fairly rural, and they know that there's very few votes in them banging on about building more houses in their area, because the people who live there and vote for them don't support it. And even David Cameron, for example, when we were in opposition against Blair and Brown, railed against Labour's housing targets. Of course, reality then catches up with you. We brought the housing targets back because we weren't building enough houses. And I suspect that the rhetoric of Rishi Sunak might be different from what actually happens on the ground in terms of trying to get new houses built. So I don't think it's a fundamental change in the Tory attitude. It's how politics works on the ground and what Tory MPs feel they need to hold on to their seats.
Although house building has collapsed to the lowest level it's been in 5 years, I do wonder, if there aren't more houses built, will there be no more Conservatives?
Well, I think part of the reason for the collapse in house building has obviously been the state of the economy and the pandemic and so on and so forth. So that has a huge impact on what house builders can get done. But we have to be imaginative about housing, and we have to try and win over local communities to more housing.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it
there.
We've got to get to a break. But Edvezi, thank you so much for joining us this morning even. I really appreciate your time and indeed your thoughts. Back after this.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very good morning to you on this Friday, the 5th of May. This is To The Point with Bev Turner, who's at Buckingham Palace for us, and I am indeed in the GB News studio. My name's Tom Harwood. We're going over the results from last night, and indeed what a voting day it had been, in what continues to be a remarkable set of results. Hull remains in the hands of the Lib Dems. Anna Riley has the latest.
Yes, the Liberal Democrats are celebrating here in Hull after retaining control of the council and gaining more seats. I'll have more for you very soon.
And of course, it's the final countdown to the coronation. Thousands of people have already descended on the Mall, where Bev Turner is among them.
That's right, Tom. It is extremely busy down here now. Tons of people arriving. I've bumped into Belinda DeLucy, GB News familiar face from Dan Wotton's show. I didn't know this about you, Belinda. We've got a lot to talk about.
Secret royal superfan.
A secret royal superfan. There are a lot of superfans down here. I'm going to be talking to them in just a moment.
Fantastic. Can't wait to see it. So much to come in the next hour, and we want to know what you think about it all. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the address to email. But first, here's your news update with Rihanna.
Tom, thank you. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 11, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Conservatives have suffered heavy losses in local elections in England, with Labour and the Liberal Democrats both making gains. The Tories have lost control of 10 councils so far, including Windsor and Maidenhead, which has gone to the Lib Dems. Labour's gained 3, including Plymouth, Hartlepool and Worcester. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has acknowledged some disappointing results, but denies there's been a big swing to Labour.
We're making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, Bassetlaw, Sandwell, but the message I am hearing from people tonight is that they want us to focus on their priorities and they want us to deliver for them. And that's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. That's what people care about, that's what they want us to deliver, and that's what I and the government are going to work very hard to do.
Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, meanwhile, believes he's now on course to become the next Prime Minister.
We've just taken Medway for the first time since 1998. That is a very, very good night for the Labour Party. We didn't just get it over the line, we absolutely smashed it. And it's the same story elsewhere. Same story in Plymouth, in Stoke, up in Middlesbrough, and these are the key battlegrounds as we go into the next election. And make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election.
Well, Rishi Sunak's back in Downing Street hosting world leaders arriving for the King's coronation. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was first to arrive. Rishi Sunak's also hosting New Zealand's Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. Both are vocal Republicans, but have said they'll swear allegiance to the King tomorrow. The Emir of Qatar has also arrived at Downing Street. Meanwhile, the King and Queen Consort are at Westminster Abbey for the final rehearsal ahead of tomorrow's coronation. The King's said to have waved at the crowds who've gathered as his convoy arrived, with a little over 24 hours now to go until the ceremony. And the Prince and Princess of Wales have also arrived at the Abbey for the final rehearsal. It comes a day after they travelled for the very first time on the Elizabeth line to central London, where they visited a pub, pulled a pint and spoke to well-wishers. And people travelling on the railways this weekend will be told to mind the gap by very special voices, by none other than the King and Queen Consort themselves. They've recorded an announcement to be played at every railway and underground station across the UK all weekend and Bank Holiday Monday.
My wife and I wish you and your families a wonderful coronation weekend.
Wherever you are travelling, we hope you have a safe and pleasant journey.
And remember, please mind the gap.
Well, that as rail travellers are facing disruption again after RMT members backed further strikes over the next 6 months. Workers at 14 train operating companies have already announced plans to walk off the job next weekend. The strike will disrupt travel to the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool. The result from the latest ballots saw a 70% turnout, with over 90% of union members voting in favour of further industrial action. Transport Minister Mark Harper says he's disappointed by the decision. A 33-year-old man has been charged with the murder of a woman stabbed to death in Brixton in South London earlier this week. Police believe 31-year-old Johannita Kosiwa-Dogby was attacked from behind as she walked home on Monday afternoon. Mohammed Nur has been charged with murder and grievous bodily harm after 2 women and a man were slashed in separate incidents last Saturday. Police in Serbia have arrested a suspect after 8 people were shot dead in a village near Belgrade.
13 others were wounded in the shooting. Police say a 21-year-old has now been detained. It's the second mass shooting around the capital in as many days. A 13-year-old boy shot dead 9 children at a school on Wednesday before turning himself in. Back here, schools say they're increasingly struggling to recruit teachers, with tens of thousands of vacancies. The Recruitment and Employment Confederation says issues over pay aren't being addressed. Teachers are embroiled in an ongoing dispute, with more strikes threatened later this year. And first-time buyers are paying on average £200 more a month for their mortgage compared with this time last year. Rightmove says new homeowners who put down a 15% deposit are now paying more than £1,000 a month. The property website also says the average asking price for a first-time buyer is now almost £225,000. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Bev.
Thank you for joining us on this Friday, a very special Friday, not just the eve of the coronation, but of course the aftermath of those local elections that affected so many areas in England yesterday. Results continue to fly in, and the Conservatives are already looking like they're having some bleak results, with over 200 councillors having already lost their seat. That's on around 20% of the votes counted. But the spoils are currently slightly evenly divided between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. We'll see how that develops through the course of the day. But with only 64 councils counting votes overnight, we still don't know, of course, the full extent of that picture. So let's get the reaction to the progress so far with GB News political commentator, senior political commentator, I should say, Nigel Nelson, GB News presenter, Esther McVeigh, the Conservative MP for Tatton, and, of course, Thangam Debonair, the Labour MP for Bristol West. Let's start with you, Thangam, because clearly there's a lot of emphasis on the councillors and indeed councils that Labour has picked up. I wonder, do you think this was a vote for Keir Starmer or a vote against Rishi Sunak?
Well, a vote against Rishi Sunak would have been staying at home or don't know. And what I heard on the doorstep as I was campaigning across the country was people who were saying they didn't feel the Tories understood the effect of the cost of living crisis on their lives, and they didn't feel the Tories had any solutions either, which is exactly what happened in the campaign, not a mention of the cost of living crisis in the Tories. Whereas the Labour Party was putting forward practical, costed, realistic proposals to help them with the problems in their lives, whether that was on the cost of living, which we obviously want to tackle, cutting crime, people feeling afraid to go into their town centres. We want to put neighbourhood police back on the street. Or cutting waiting lists, which is holding individuals back, but also holding businesses back. So that's what I was hearing on the doorstep. I saw us also, Tom, making gains in places like, we're in Kent. Medway, that was a fantastic result. Seeing Keir on the pier this morning was also rather jolly for those of us who like political rhyming. But also, winning back Plymouth, very unhappy look on a Tory MP's face there from that count as the Labour cheers rose behind him. And Stoke. Now, these are places that I think people had written off the Labour Party in, and it just goes to show that from where I'm looking, we are on course to do really well in the general election. It's not over yet. Got a long way to go. Looking forward to seeing the result from Swindon and other councils as we go later on in the day. But with only a quarter of the results here so far, the Tories are already set course for that 1,000-seat loss that they themselves predicted, which is catastrophic for Rishi Sunak.
Is it perhaps a little bit disingenuous to have campaigned on issues that aren't really to do with local councillors? You mentioned there more police on the streets, NHS funding and waiting lists. These are all decisions for Westminster. Local councillors decide planning policy, bins and schools. Did you campaign on those issues?
Yes, at local level, of course. Each Labour council, each Labour group of campaigners at the council level also brings into play those very local issues because, of course, this is, as you said, Tom, this is a really live issue for people up and down the country. Are my bins collected on time? Do the streets have potholes in? Do I feel safe in my communities? Those are things that people
Why
care
wasn't
about,
that coming from the national campaign?
Because there's also a national feeling and people vote for a variety of reasons in local campaigns, and this is something that people were telling us. We were reflecting what people were telling us on the doorstep and have been doing 4 months. I've been campaigning in Swindon now for quite some time. I know most of the roundabouts in Swindon. If you don't know Swindon, there's a lot of roundabouts. But there's also a lot of fantastic people and businesses who just don't feel that 21 years of Tory council and 10 or 15 years of Tory MPs has done them any good whatsoever. They weren't just turning away from the Tories, they were turning towards what we were offering them. So responding on national issues is because that's what people were bringing up.
Well, let's bring in Esther McVeigh now, because, Esther, is it concerning to you as a Conservative, as a former Cabinet Minister, a senior figure in the Conservative Party, that the Labour Party seems to be doing better amongst Brexit voting areas? There are places that voted Remain that might be leaning more Lib Dem, but the real big gains that we've seen so far, at least, seem to be in Brexit heartlands for the Labour Party.
Well, you will have seen people like UKIP won't be standing, so some of that vote that would have been split isn't. But you're right, it's been a bad night for the Conservative Party, which we knew, and some of those Brexit voters will have moved back to the Labour Party. Looking at Plymouth, which was quite interesting, actually. I thought it was a spectacular whole go by the Conservative Council. You remember, they cut down 110 trees. So in that regard, actually, that would have been, I think, what would have shifted the dial there. And the local issue rather than the national. It was the local issue there. And then you're seeing in Maidenhead, it's interesting what the Lib Dems are doing, because I always think that they've got difficulties when they rule, as it were, if they ever got into power, because they sort of find a weakness and then play to it. And there it was all about stopping building. That was what they were doing in the Theresa May seat, as it were. But look, we knew it was going to be a bad night. What I'm not saying, interestingly, is the absolute desire for Keir Starmer, not seeing the big 15% lead that you would have seen under Tony Blair in sort of 94, 96, or that big lead that David Cameron got in 2008
that was a deep
and 9.
intake of breath.
It was. I mean, I just thought, you know, Rishi Sunak in the pool clip earlier was trying to spin Sandwell as a great result for the Tories. Like, it was a third of the councillors up this year, a third of them up last year. We won 24 out of 24 last year. We won 22 out of 24 this year. I don't see these as great results for the Tories. And I also think it's extraordinary that after the catastrophic results in 2019, the only way for the Tories should have been up. They lost so many seats, 1,330 odd in 2019. Theresa May had to resign on top of apologising for them in 2019. What's Rishi Sunak going to have to do for what looks set to be that 1,000-seat loss? This is bad for Rishi Sunak, and I think you know it.
And I think what we saw, and I said it was a bad night, I'm not arguing that, but what we've seen really is nibbles either side by Lib Dems and Labour. And what you've also seen, I think, is Rishi Sunak steadying the ship. If these local elections had have been last October, you would have seen much bigger losses. But what we're not saying, and I'm not getting on the door, people aren't saying to me, oh, we love Keir Starmer and we love Rachel Reeves, like they did about Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. I'm not getting that. But what I am getting is people saying, we don't at the moment feel motivated to come out for Conservatives, and 2 staying at home is the equivalent of 1 Labour voter. And the other thing they're sort of saying is, we do feel upset and we're going to give you a drubbing in this because we feel we can at these local elections. But as I said, we'll see what else comes in.
Fangham, that's a fair point, isn't it? Sort of Blair had this sort of media mayhem around him. Even Ed Miliband had the Millibay movement. Is there anything equivalent for Keir Starmer? Does he excite the Labour base?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's what sent volunteers out campaigning up and down the country, and also sent volunteers to campaign in places which maybe they weren't used to campaigning. That's showed up in good results for us, taking back Hartlepool. If with this vote share, sorry, not taking back the council because only a third of the seats were up, but if the vote share aggregated across Hartlepool was reflected in the general election, we'd be taking that back the parliamentary seat. We'd be taking back Stoke seats. We'd be taking back seats across the board, as you said, Tom. Some of them that were voting Brexit. I do think it's really interesting, though, that what Esther's saying and other Tories are saying is Rishi steadied the ship. Who rocked the ship? Where is the ship? The ship isn't just on the floor of the ocean. I think it's sunk below the ocean floor. It is in the Earth's core. Rishi Sunak loses more seats.
But what we've got to say, obviously, the Conservatives
You've been in charge a while.
Winning elections. Massive win.
And you tanked the economy.
Hang on.
Hang on.
In 2019. But what we did see, which absolutely changed the dynamics in the last couple of years, has been COVID was lockdown. I'm one of the very few MPs who can stand up and say, I saw the cost of living crisis coming if we stayed in lockdown for longer. Now, Boris Johnson should get credit for coming out of lockdown. Labour would have stayed there, would have crashed it. Yes, it is.
No, that's not.
Labour voted and would have had it for longer and harder.
Repeatedly, all the way through the COVID.
No, you were pushing
did
for
say
it.
that the unlocking in the summer, the final unlocking, that big move, Sir Keir Starmer did warn that that could create a fourth wave that then never materialised.
Could, and we did actually have further infections, but actually it's just not the case that we voted against the government's provisions. We exercised what I thought was considerable space. That's just not the case. And the Labour Party...
It is, because I went in the opposition. I went through the opposition lobby, i.e. against lockdown, and I'm afraid there was no Labour people there to be seen, maybe one or two.
I think people really, and understandably, want to move on to hearing the Tories talk about the problems they are facing now, which is a cost of living crisis where they can't see how they're going to pay their bills. Never mind save up for a holiday, which frankly they deserve.
But can I ask you what you would do in the What would you do in the cost of living? The Tory party have put in tens of billions of pounds. All I see from Labour actually is more charges on those who can least afford it with the clean air zones and ULEZ.
The oil and gas industries can least afford to pay more tax. I don't think so. Even this week, they've been recording even more record profits on sales that they never expected to be able to charge this much money on. We would be taxing them right now to help spend that money on helping people through the cost of living crisis in a time-limited way. He has created a massive loophole,
he's already
which the oil and gas companies walk right into.
Windfall tax on
massive loopholes.
Significantly put.
People watching know that they can't afford to pay their bills.
If you still want to have investment from these companies and them not move out the country, you've obviously got to give them a way to do that. But he's put a significant windfall tax on them, and rightly so, which I've sort of agreed and asked for.
People watching know whether or not they can pay their bills. But you know, if you've been knocking on as many doors as I have, Esther, that people are saying up and down the country, even people in good jobs who've never had a struggle before, they're saying they do not know how they're going to get to the end of the month or the end of the year.
And that's why about 40 billion has been put into health
Let's move this conversation on
Labour would have
ever so
locked down and
slightly
destroyed the economy more.
To the question of inflation, the thing that is driving this cost of living crisis. We've got almost as high food inflation as Germany does, touching 20%, and of course other areas of inflation as well are quite high. The Conservative Party has said that it wants to keep it down. It's got this path to reducing inflation through basically restraint on public spending. And that's why we've seen a lot of contentious arguments about wage battles between unions and all the rest of it, wanting to not enter into that wage price spiral. Would the Labour Party have the same discipline?
Look, I don't think that anybody watching thinks that the inflation, the food prices are going up because nurses want a pay rise. They were the ones nursing us. They were the ones caring for us at our national hour.
But there's no cost-free way out of inflation, is there?
There is a good way of dealing with worker relationships, especially in the public sector. Under the last Labour government, there were a total of 0 strikes in the NHS. Why? Because we kept working together. We didn't always agree. The trade unions sometimes had very strong disagreements with the Labour government, but we kept talking. In contrast, the Tories were offered by Christina McAnee, head of Unison, by the Royal College of Nurses, they were offered, come and negotiate with us anytime, anywhere, including Christmas Day. What happened? Nothing. And that's who's responsible. And people know this. They know that the Tories just held back and held back. Inflation isn't caused by nurses demanding a pay rise for treatment that they've had to experience, not just in the COVID, but over 13 years.
It could be exacerbated by the wage price spiral that then goes.
There are so many factors in this, and the Tories are very keen to blame Ukraine when it suits them and nurses when it does, when something else suits them.
The Conservatives came back.
This has been an incredibly spirited debate, but I'm going to have to go to an advert break. Thank Debonair, Esther McVeigh, thank you so much for joining us and talking through those issues. But before that advert break, let's cross across to Hull, where our reporter Anna Riley is reporting on an interesting result. There was a battle between the Lib Dems and the Labour Party. Anna, who won out?
Well, Lib Dems are certainly celebrating here in Hull. They kept the majority, so they're still leading the council, and they gained an extra 3 seats, 2 from Labour and 1 from an independent, non-aligned councillor. That means that they've now got 32 seats, a 7-seat majority, versus Labour's 25 seats, and there's no Conservatives here. Locally, issues that people wanted to focus on were around roads and transport, and in particular the running times terms of the bus lane. So people who have gone out to vote today will be hoping that Lib Dems keep to those promises that they've made. But it was a low turnout. Only 22% of people here in Hull came to vote, and that was down from last year, 23.5% then coming out to vote. And last year it was pretty significant. It was when Lib Dems did take control from Labour. Labour had been in power here for 10 years, and we don't know as yet how much of an implication those voting ID laws have had, and also people reporting that they've been turned away from polling stations as to how that fed in, or if it's also voter apathy. And it's a red wall seat here, 3 Labour MPs, so we'll see in the general elections if it'll be Lib Dems here for that, or if Labour will hold their seats.
Interesting stuff, Anna. Thank you for that. Let's turn to Jack Carson, who's in the West Midlands for us. Where specifically are you, Jack?
Well, good morning, Tom. I am in Dudley, where Labour did not probably make the gains that they were hoping for. The Conservatives held control of this council today. Before yesterday's election, they had around 45 seats on the council. They've ended up this morning with 44. They've lost 1 to Labour. Labour also gained off an independent, and it means out of the 25 seats that were up for grabs yesterday, the Conservatives won 12 and Labour won 13. But the Conservatives did gain in the Labour strong ward of Brearley Hill, which was a bit of a surprise probably for a lot of Conservatives yesterday. Kedar Zadar, who's the Labour opposition leader here in Dudley, has said that they've cut the wafer-thin majorities of the Tory councillors here down, and he says he always thought by 2024 Dudley would be run by Labour. We'll have to see next year if that does come true. And of course, this as a seat constituency-wise, this seat is Conservative here in Dudley. The Dudley North MP Mark Longy has said that he was confident that last night's results would be bad news for Labour, but he still also mentions the fact of having to get Tories out and voting. He says they still have to connect with those disenfranchised voters. When you look at the turnout here in Dudley for the election yesterday, it was around 30%, which on a national scale probably is more than some other Labour council elections. But of course, when you look at the turnout ward by ward, it was down by 3 or 4 points. But here in this council election, the Conservatives managed to hold their own.
Well, Jack and Anna, indeed, thank you so much for bringing us that news on the ground there. More, of course, as this afternoon, or indeed for what's left of this morning, rolls on. We'll also have the countdown to the coronation. That clock is ticking, and we'll be live on the Mall with all that you need to know. That's next. Stay with us on GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back for our special results look on here on GB News. Those local elections results, of course, continue to fly in across the country. The Conservatives' results are already looking bleak, with over 200 councillors having lost their seats. But the spoils are currently divided between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. With only 64 councils counting votes overnight, however, we still will not know the full picture until later on today. But let's have a look at some of these results. The latest in from Hull is that Labour are on 25 and the Lib Dems on 32. Significant, because Labour had been looking to take this council. They haven't managed to do it. Where they have managed to do, however, is Stoke-on-Trent. Labour are way up on 29, with the Conservatives falling back to 14. That's a loss of over 10 seats. And in Plymouth, again, huge Labour gains. Labour are up to 31 seats on the council, and the Tories have crashed down to 18. That's a Labour gain as well. And to Medway in Kent, a very key area with 3 Conservative MPs. Well, the Labour Party has stormed ahead. Again, a dozen gains, where the Labour Party are on 31 seats now to the Conservatives' 21. That's now a Labour-controlled council. And to Windsor, the Lib Dems have been making gains in this true blue area. They have shot up to 22 seats, including taking the ward that represents Eton College. What might all the Eton-educated Tories think about that? Well, let's get some reaction now of GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and GB News presenter Esther McVeigh, who both join me in the studio. Nigel, trying to piece together this narrative, this is still sort of following what a lot of Tories were saying they thought would happen. Perhaps the worst end of that central estimate, but many people were saying 1,000 seats lost. And that looks like what's taking place.
It certainly does. And I thought that was just expectation management by the Tories. I honestly didn't think that it would go as high as that. Now, OK, we've got an awful lot more results to come through this afternoon when things will become clear. Labour would certainly hope to make gains on the afternoon's results that come through. But certainly we are beginning to look like that maybe the Tories are losing 1,000 plus. What Keir Starmer has to actually end up with is to be at least 10% ahead in the national vote to have to know that he's got a good chance of winning the next general election. But yes, it's been a bad night for the Tories. Lib Dems seem cock-a-hoop that they've been able to take Windsor. Let's see what they do this afternoon. There's some more seats coming up. The Greens we haven't mentioned. They've been doing reasonably well as well, and it's a possibility that at around about 4 o'clock, when Mid-Suffolk declares, that could become their first council.
Never held a council.
Never held a council in their own right before. At the moment, they're in minority control in Brighton and Hove, but this would be their first outright council.
That's a really, really interesting one to keep our eyes on. Nigel, I know you'll be doing that. But Esther, looking at the Lib Dems, they're relatively strong in your part of the world, around Greater Manchester, particularly in the periphery. They're really going after these blue seats.
And I think that's been their plan of attack, and they'll usually find whatever a weakness is in an area and go to that area and exploit that. So, unfortunately for Lib Dems, they've usually got different messages in different areas, which makes it more complex.
They're
when actually they get
pro-HS2
into
in some parts of the country and anti in others.
They're anti-development in some form, but actually if they need a younger voter elsewhere, they're pro-development to get them on the housing ladder. So that will always trip them up. But at the moment, they're exploiting those weaknesses and also, you know, looking at environmental issues as well.
Really interesting to see how potentially those local results don't always translate into national results there. We'll have more of these results analysed as the programme goes on, but for now, a 90-year-old former dancer and model who was invited to Queen Elizabeth's coronation 70 years ago has said she'll never forget that magnificent spectacle. Our home editor, Mark White, has been to meet Joyce Day, who says she's very excited about King Charles's coronation and believes he'll be a great king.
I didn't know how incredibly important it was. I mean, we couldn't imagine a gathering such as we are having. This is the actual invitation that I got. Very exciting and really should be framed. In fact, I am now going to frame it.
Joyce Day was just 21 and training with the Royal Academy of Dance when her name was pulled out of a hat to attend Queen Elizabeth's coronation. An incredible privilege and an occasion the 90-year-old still remembers vividly.
To see the Queen and the processions and everything was very exciting. Beautiful too. And the music in the Abbey was sensational.
It was, Joyce remembers, a freezing cold day. Luckily, the excitement of the occasion overrode the chills.
Well, first of all, we had to be there between 6 and 7 in the morning. And we had to have dresses on of light material. And although it was freezing cold, we could have a light stole around our shoulders.
Joyce, who went on to have a successful career in modelling, remembers the almost comically absurd spectacle of being dropped off at the front of Westminster Abbey by her boyfriend in an old converted Morris.
And he was still then. He went back round Trafalgar Square and he got a great cheer in his car because most of them were very grand cars. But he said it was a sort of cheer that the dustman gets when he goes around. So maybe a few whistles too.
After a long wait, the ceremony was worth it. It was, she says, nothing short of incredible.
It was very impressive. And we were high up in the Abbey. It was a magnificent view, very high up, and it was magnificent. I mean, I've seen things that the French do. They do quite well. But I think we're the best at that. I'm watching with interest what happens to Charles. I think this is going to be refreshing.
As you watch the coronation on the television this time, no doubt your memory will take you back to that event back in '53.
Yes. Yes, I think it's going to be amazing for me to see it again. And I shall take it in more this time, looking on, than I really felt doing it when I was so young and so long ago. It's a big thing to organise, and I wish them well. It's going to be very exciting.
It's going to be very exciting indeed. You're watching and listening to Britain's news channel here on GB News. So much more to come. But first, here's your news update with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Tom. It's coming up to 11:35, your top stories from the GB newsroom.
The Conservatives have suffered heavy losses in local elections in England, with Labour and the Liberal Democrats both making gains. The Tories have lost control of 10 councils so far, including Windsor and Maidenhead, which has gone to the Lib Dems. Labour's gained 3, including Plymouth, Stoke-on-Trent and Medway. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has acknowledged some disappointing results, but denies there's been a big swing to Labour. Meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer believes he's now on course to becoming the next Prime Minister.
We've just taken Medway for the first time since 1998. That is a very, very good night for the Labour Party. We didn't just get it over the line, we absolutely smashed it. And it's the same story elsewhere. Same story in Plymouth, in Stoke, up in Middlesbrough, and these are the key battlegrounds as we go into the next election. And make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election.
While Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey's been celebrating in Windsor, standing in front of a general election countdown clock with a sign saying time's up for Rishi Sunak. He says his party is making big gains across the country.
I'm really proud of the party. People have been voting for us, for our positive candidates who really work hard for their communities, for our policies on things like the health service and the cost of living. But I'll be honest with you, they've also been voting against the Conservatives. They really think the Conservatives let them down, or are out of touch and lack integrity. So it's a great night for the Democrats, and I think people now want a general election. They want this government out.
The countdown is on. The King and Queen Consort are at Westminster Abbey for the final rehearsal ahead of tomorrow's coronation. King Charles waved to crowds who've gathered for the historic event as his convoy arrived, with little over 24 hours now to go until the ceremony. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2608 and €1.1433. The price of gold is £1,616.19 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,731 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, not only is today a special day in terms of leading up to the coronation of our new king, it's also the fallout of those local elections. And our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in Middlesbrough for us. Darren, what's happened in Middlesbrough across yesterday?
Yeah, very good morning, Tom, from the northeast of England. Let me talk a little bit about the region first, and I'll come back to Middlesbrough. First of all, when you look at places like Newcastle, Sunderland, South Tyneside, places that have been traditionally Labour, well, unsurprisingly, they have managed to hold on to the councils there. We're expecting the results from Stockton any minutes now, in fact, in the next couple of minutes. And also interesting when you look at Hartlepool, where Labour have effectively kind of regain control there. They're slightly slim of an overall majority, but they'll probably patch together a coalition government where they'll be back in control of Hartlepool. As for here in Middlesbrough, well, counting is well underway. We're not expecting the result until around 3 o'clock this afternoon. The Conservatives saying that things are on a knife edge here. They are in control, but the expectation is that Labour will do particularly well. And it is places like Middlesbrough where Labour need to be doing well if they're within any chance of winning the next general election. And there was a victory for them last night here in Middlesbrough, where they took control of the mayoralty here. It was pretty close in the end, only 960 votes in it, but Labour very much back in control of that, taking it from an independent. Clearly, there is a sense that Labour need to win back the red wall. The mood music here is when you look at the votes that we've seen overnight in the northeast, and you sway that through to the West Midlands effectively, somewhere like Stoke-on-Trent, Labour would argue they are starting to do that. Bolsover, a perfect example of that, where Labour back in control there. A seat they lost, a seat that had been Labour for decades under Dennis Skinner. It is now at council level back in their control.
Well, Darren, thank you so much for bringing us the very latest there from Middlesbrough. We'll be back with you, of course, throughout the afternoon, as we're ticking up to the afternoon now. But for now, let's turn to our panel here in the GB News studio. Delighted to be joined still by Esther McVeigh, the Conservative MP for Tatton, and Lord Faulkner, the Labour peer, has joined us as well. Nigel Nelson also with us in the studio. And Lord Faulkner, let's start with you, because this is an interesting step on the road to the general election. It's the last opportunity, really, for the public to vote before that general election. What do you think it says?
Well, I think it says two things. First of all, people are willing to go in Labour's heartland to go back to Labour. And Darren was very interesting as he described Middlesbrough, Stoke-on-Trent, other places like that, which had traditionally been Labour, and then Boris Johnson had taken them off Labour in general elections. They're now going back to Labour. And secondly, in a time of normality, unlike the crises that we've gone through, the public aren't willing to have the Tories really at any price. The fashionable talk in Westminster is, oh, now that Rishi Sunak is there, that's stabilised the Conservatives. People think he's better than the sort of incorrigible liar and the completely amazingly mad Liz Truss. So that must make things better for us. People like Rishi Sunak on the doorstep, says the chairman. But look, there's no sign of it. The public are not willing to have the Tories at any price. I'm wary about drawing any snapshots, take these figures and make it seem what it's going to be like in a general election. But look at the mood. Labour's getting its heartland back. There's not much of the country that wants the Tories at the moment. So, I've seen defeats for the Tories overnight in Hertfordshire and Gloucestershire. Those are not Labour heartlands, they're Tory heartlands. Something has happened, and what's happened, I think, is the country's made a decision both about the Tories, we don't want them at any price, and Labour, yes, we will return to them.
Now, Nigel, you were Britain's longest-serving political editor of a Sunday newspaper, and do you think that this is a wake-up call for MPs who have been reading perhaps newspapers too much and not absorbing the reality of the polls? I mean, this just bears out what we've been seeing for months in the polls. The Tories are considerably behind. Is this their first wake-up call?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a wake-up call, whether it's their first one. I think that the Tories probably realised that they're in trouble quite some time ago. And in fairness to Rishi Sunak, what he has done is narrowed the polls slightly. So we're talking about a 15-point Labour lead. It's still an awful lot, but it's not like the 25s we were seeing a little bit earlier. I think that what has been interesting there, as Charlie pointed out, it's things like demolishing the Red Wall, which is really important for Labour to get back those seats. Along with Middlesbrough, which Darren's been telling us about, will be Darlington coming up at the same time. There's a seat that has got 20 Tory councillors at the moment, 22 Tory councillors, 2 ahead of Labour. Labour should take that seat, and on the basis of that, you need that to win the general election. Then we've got the Lib Dems, who seem to be demolishing or beginning to demolish the Blue Wall. Once you've got those two things crumbling, then it's going to be very difficult come general election time for the Conservatives to win.
Well, let's have a look at the result in Stoke-on-Trent, because this is particularly interesting. 3 Conservative MPs that were won in 2019, and now look at it. From no majority on the council to a Labour majority on the council. 29 seats won by the Labour Party, 14 by the Conservatives. That's more than 10 gains for the Labour Party in this Brexit heartland. Esther McVeigh, you were a senior Brexiteer, a senior Conservative MP still. What does this say about how Labour's recovering in areas that voted Leave?
I think there's a combination of factors. You would have had people like UKIP in their Brexit party and they're splitting the vote, etc., which you don't have now. And obviously those votes have gone back in some part to the Labour Party. Listening to what Nigel said there about how Rishi Sunak is seen as the adult back in charge. He's got the competency back into the Conservative Party, so those polls have narrowed. And coming to what Charlie said, which I agree with, on the doorstep, people are saying, we much prefer Rishi. He's given us that stability back.
Prefer Rishi to Liz Truss. I mean, it's quite a low bar.
But equally, more so than maybe Keir Starmer. They're neck and neck in the polls now. And I think if that weren't the case, I don't think the Labour Party would have done those attack adverts that they did against Rishi,
Charlie,
if they hadn't seen him as a threat.
I mean, I was interested in what Esther was saying. Do you think in places like Bassetlaw, Middlesbrough, Bolsover, all very pro-Brexit areas, there's a massive disappointment about the Conservative government not delivering anything in relation to Brexit? I saw some figures before I came here, which I think GBNews might have put together, which indicated the biggest swing to Labour so far in these incomplete results is in Brexit areas, which looks like the Red Wall might be thinking, we've flirted with the Brexit Tories, Boris Johnson, maybe Esther McVeigh, and have now decided there's nothing there for us. So they're going back home to Labour. And if that's happening, then we are going to get a majority in the general election.
What you've seen there is people saying, did we get that Brexit dividend? And I would say a lot of that was put on hold because the country was locked down for 2 years. They're also now looking at the boats coming over from Calais into Dover, and they're saying, I thought we were taking back control. What are you doing, the Conservative government? And I say be mindful of voting Labour, because they would have a greater open-door policy. So I think you're right. They're saying, did we take back that control? And that's why the clock is ticking for Rishi, and he has have got to do these things, stopping those votes, bringing in all this legislation. But Labour haven't helped themselves there. But people are still waiting for, as I said, those Brexit dividends, and Rishi has got to deliver them with the trade deals, which we're starting to see come through for them.
They were cross. Our red wall was really cross with us in the build-up to 2019 because I think they think we didn't deliver over quite a long period of time. They will think the same now of your party. So they'll be cross, and however much Rishi sort of brushes his teeth and looks smart on the telly and is not surrounded with men in white coats, nevertheless, that is not going to deal with the sense of betrayal.
Do you agree with me, though? I guess the appeal that Blair and Brown had, I'm not seeing and I'm not hearing, and people aren't thinking of Keir and Rachel Reeves. They're just not that attracted to them. So 7-8% lead, like an Ed Miliband, isn't good enough. They've got to get back to those days of a 15-point lead with either David Cameron before they won in 2010 or the Labour Party had before 97.
I agree with you that we're not seeing that huge sense of hope that Blair and Brown gave in the build-up to 97. But which politician could achieve that now after, for example, the expenses scandals? The standing of politicians is really going to... You're never going to get that.
Well, you say that, but Boris did do that in 2019 with an 86 majority.
There are some charismatic members
charisma.
of the shadow cabinet. Wes Streeting is a name that's often bandied around as someone who's a future leader.
And people say Kemi Badenoch then in the Tory, but you have got it.
You can see a sort of new generation almost inspiring more hope than the perhaps more technocratic, some, dare I say it, dull attitude of Keir Starmer.
Well, I mean, Esther, interesting enough, says Kemi Badenoch and Boris, but isn't the story of Boris that it was all a chimera? It was unreal. He told lies. He then said, I'll do Brexit. He did Brexit. And what's happened? The country feels, his supporters feel betrayed. There's quite a lot of people who thought, well, he was always a bit of a con man. But those who supported him have now ended up with nothing.
But those who did support him and knew that character was required to get Brexit through, to break the deadlock, to go against Labour, who didn't want to see it through. They would have had another sort of referendum to go back, and the Lib Dems. So they needed that big, bumptious personality, and the people came out and did vote for him with an 80-seat majority. Then they say his time has been and gone, and now what we need is that calmer personality. Maybe a technocrat, but somebody who is into the detail, and that is Rishi Sunak, who's into the detail. And probably they're fairly matched across the dispatch box, aren't they? Keir and Rishi. In fact, I'd say Rishi wins a Prime Minister's questions
well, Esther,
each week.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Lord Faulkner as well, thank you so much for joining us, and indeed Nigel Nelson. We're going to move on to our final story of the day, which is, of course, about the coronation in this big build-up. Let's get more on it now with the editor-at-large of the Mail on Sunday, Charlotte Griffiths. Charlotte, thank you for making the time. This is a huge, huge moment for the country. The final preparations taking place now. World leaders, over 100 world leaders flying into London. How is it all going to go?
I think it's going to go really well. This time tomorrow, we'll be in the middle of the coronation. It's going to be really exciting. There's going to be two slightly awkward moments. We've got Han Zheng coming over from China. He's not going to be in the popular seats, and neither is Prince Harry. But other than that, I think it's going to go really smoothly. The weather might rain, but that's England for you. I think it's going to be a really wonderful, amazing celebration of the monarchy.
It's so interesting to see the sort of politics that surrounds this as well, that almost orbits the event. We've seen Rishi Sunak already have bilateral meetings with several world leaders. Do you think it's a shame? Do you think it's a misstep from the Americans that Joe Biden is only sending his wife?
Yeah, it's an interesting one about Joe Biden, because we don't know the exact reasons why. It might be that he's not up for a 2-hour ceremony. You know, he is kind of an older statesman, so perhaps it's better to send his wife. Yeah, it might be a missed opportunity. Might be.
I just wonder, with the sort of changes that we're seeing to the ceremony, still elements of this that date back 1,000 years from when the first kings and queens were crowned at Westminster Abbey. Other elements seem a bit curtailed. Fewer people in the Abbey than in 1953. A shorter procession route. Will that matter on the day?
I think he's right to modernise it a bit. One thing that I think is a bit of a shame is I think the dress is going to be less exciting. You know, the 1953 coronation was incredibly glamorous. When you look back at the pictures of the ladies in waiting, they were just stunning. Whereas now we're hearing that Kate might not even wear a tiara. I'm also hearing that there aren't going to be that many people wearing hats even, because Charles didn't stipulate hats on the invitation, because he didn't want people to have to buy a train ticket and their accommodation and a hat as well. So he's been very conscious of the cost for other people, but it could create a sort of atmosphere of less pomp than I certainly would like. And then there's the thing about, you know, not everyone's going to be wearing ermine. So it might be less visually extravagant, but maybe more appropriate. And that's what Charles is clearly trying to do. He's trying to be appropriate for the modern times, and he doesn't want to look like he's making everyone spend a fortune, and he doesn't want to look, in a word, too bling.
And clearly, I think for some elements of this, it's going to be more visually exciting than 1953. We've got higher definition cameras, we've got boom cranes that are going to give us sweeping shots of all this glorious gold and the rest of it. I wonder, how will this be received and looked back upon as time goes on?
I think it will be... Well, I think you're right about the camera and the HD, actually. I hadn't really thought of that, but that is a good point. And there will be celebrities and other modern things like that this time round. And, you know, really good view into the state coach. So I think we'll probably look back at it, in high definition. You know, those grainy black and white photos of the coronation aren't that exciting to look at in some ways. So I think we'll look back at it as a good, scaled back, but pretty heavy event.
Well, Charlotte Griffiths, editor-at-large of The Mail on Sunday, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News and getting your views of that huge event that is taking place tomorrow. And indeed, we will be going next live to Buckingham Palace, where Mark Longhurst and indeed Alistair Stewart will give us all the latest updates live from Buckingham Palace. So let's stick around for that and all latest coming up from midday.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Good afternoon. It's just gone 12 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Conservatives have suffered heavy losses in local elections in England, with Labour and the Liberal Democrats both making gains. The Tories have lost control of 11 councils now, including Windsor and Maidenhead, which has gone to the Lib Dems. Labour's gained 3, including Plymouth, Stoke-on-Trent and Medway. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's acknowledged some disappointing results, but denies there's been a big swing to Labour.
We're making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, Bassetlaw, Sandwell, but the message I am hearing from people tonight is that they want us to focus on their priorities and they want us to deliver for them. And that's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. That's what people care about, that's what they want us to deliver, and that's what I and the government are going to work very hard to do.
Meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer believes he's now on course to becoming the next Prime Minister.
We've just taken Medway for the first time since 1998. That is a very, very good night for the Labour Party. We didn't just get it over the line, we absolutely smashed it. And it's the same story elsewhere. Same story in Plymouth, in Stoke, up in Middlesbrough. And these are the key battlegrounds as we go into the next election. And make no mistake, this means that we are on course for a Labour majority at the next election.
While Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey's been celebrating in Windsor, standing in front of a general election countdown clock with a sign saying, "Time's up" for Rishi Sunak. He says his party's making big gains across the country.
I'm really proud of the party. People have been voting for us, for our positive candidates who really work hard for their communities, for our policies on things like the health service and the cost of living. But I'll be honest with you, they've also been voting against the Conservatives. They really think the Conservatives let them down, are out of touch and lack integrity. So it's a great night for the Democrats, and I think people now want a general election. They want this government out.
While the Prime Minister's back in Downing Street hosting world leaders arriving for the King's coronation. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was first to arrive. Rishi Sunak's also hosting New Zealand's Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. Both are vocal Republicans, but have said they will swear allegiance to the King tomorrow. The Emir of Qatar's also arrived at Downing Street. And the King and Queen Consort are at Westminster Abbey for the final rehearsal ahead of tomorrow's coronation. King Charles waved at the crowds gathered at the Abbey as his convoy arrived. The Prince and Princess of Wales arrived a short time later to join the rehearsal. And more than 400,000 people are to receive a medal in recognition of their contribution to the King's coronation. Police officers, choristers, military personnel and ambulance workers are among those who'll receive the medals. Made of nickel silver, they feature a portrait of King Charles and the Queen Consort, and on the other side a laurel wreath and the date of the coronation. Meanwhile, people travelling on the railways this weekend will be told to mind the gap by a very special voice indeed, by none other than the King himself. Joined by the Queen Consort, they've recorded an announcement to be played at every railway and underground station across the UK all weekend and Bank Holiday Monday.
My wife and I wish you and your families a wonderful coronation weekend.
Wherever you are travelling, we hope you have a safe and pleasant journey.
And remember, please mind the gap.
And our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is at Westminster Abbey for us, where in the last few minutes, I understand, Mark, the King has indeed just departed. What's the mood there?
Yes, well, good afternoon from Westminster Abbey. Yes, indeed, the King and Queen Consort have just left Westminster Abbey, heading back towards, we understand, Clarence House, after what was the final day of rehearsals. They were joined by, well, we know for definite, the Prince of Wales. There was some suggestion the Princess of Wales might have been accompanying him, but we haven't had that confirmed as yet. But certainly the Prince of Wales was with the King and Queen as they took part in these final set of rehearsals, the last they'll be able to do ahead of the ceremony, because this time, of course, tomorrow, we will have the ceremony itself probably about an hour into the ceremony by this time tomorrow. It's just under 2 hours long, a mammoth ceremony. Before that, of course, there will be the procession of the State Diamond Jubilee coach with around 200 members of the King's Guard military on horseback up the Mall, of course, round Trafalgar Square, coming down Whitehall and down here to Westminster Abbey itself. That is going to be some spectacle, as the crowds will absolutely pack out this area. As we know, of course, we just need to remember back to the late Queen's funeral last year, and the many, many thousands who packed central London. We can expect a similar scene this time round. The good news is, of course, for those that don't get a spot here, because it is going to be first come, first served, then they will be able to go to some of the areas that have been set aside, bigger areas such as St James's Park, Green Park and Hyde Park, where there'll be very large screens up there. So not only will people enjoy the atmosphere, sort of communal atmosphere, but they will, of course, be able to see the service on those big screens. And the service itself will be, you know, one very impressive spectacle. There is no doubt at all. It's been pared back a bit from what it was in 1953, but it will still be full of grandeur and full of state occasion. We spoke to one woman, a very remarkable woman, 90-year-old Joyce Day, who was there back in 1953. She was lucky enough to be invited to Westminster Abbey then to see the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. A magnificent spectacle, she told me. She also said that she was very impressed by King Charles, and she says he has got the makings of a great king. This is what she told me.
I didn't know how incredibly important it was. I mean, we couldn't imagine a gathering such as they were having. This is the actual invitation that I got. Very exciting and really should be framed. In fact, I am now going to frame it.
Joyce Day was just 21.